32 billion items of PPE bought in the heat of a national emergency. But now the government's spending watchdog says it can't sign off on UK contracts to private companies because of potential conflicts of interest, documentation errors and lack of transparency, including links to Mauritian offshore companies, city financiers and government advisors.
This is taxpayers' money. Government wasn't publishing the details transparently as quickly as it should, according to its own rules.
Can you give the public assurance that the government has acted in line with best practice public sector standards?
We can't consistently say that, and that's the conclusion we reach in the report.
That's pretty damning, isn't it?
You need those controls in place.
So there could be fraud, there could be cronyism.
Well, we can't conclude on that, and in a way that's the issue. We can't conclude on that. We need to see the evidence in every case.
The highly critical report describes an £18 billion government spending spree, with the National Audit Office censuring the government for its lack of transparency, lack of documentation and late and retrospective contract writing. The criticism sparked political anger too.
Can the Prime Minister give a cast-iron assurance that from now on, all government contracts will be subject to proper process?
At the time, he bashed the government for not moving fast enough. It's absolutely absurd that he's now, capped in hindsight, he's now once again trying to score party political points.
The government also set up a high priority lane which allowed companies referred by ministers or officials to be fast-tracked.
It is very unusual. Again, driven
Worrying?
by, it raises the risk. Once you've established that principle that you're going to treat some as a higher priority, you need to be crystal clear on how you've assessed those.
And the government has fallen short of this.
Exactly, yes, that's what we're saying in our report.
In fact, if you went through the high priority lane, you had a 1 in 10 chance of winning a contract. Those left out of the inner circle had only a 1 in 143 chance.
If government is handing out free money, no one is going to criticise a businessman or a businesswoman for joining the queue. We have clear evidence of overpricing in contracts given. It's a big deal because if government pays to an entity that it is connected to the market price for a piece of PPE, then that's fine. If government pays to a connected entity 4 times the market price, then we have a big problem.
The report acknowledges the government had to buy PPE in enormous volumes with extreme urgency. Earlier this year, this programme showed that much of the existing PPE stockpile was out of date and had to be replaced. And suppliers we've spoken to have told us that the government buying process was chaos. The government says that it clearly benchmarks all prices to ensure it doesn't pay over the odds. But leaked documents shared with this programme show that prices jumped around astronomically, not just compared to pre-crisis levels, but when you compare exactly the same products being sold by different companies. Take the price for gloves. This went up 256%. But the government paid its new UK contractors 29p per unit, while it got gloves from old suppliers for just 2 pence. The price paid for body bags also increased, up 212%, with the government paying some suppliers just £1.69 per item and other companies as much as almost £25. The report highlights a handful of the new fast-track companies that have since been tagged with amber or red warnings. This tiny company in Littlehampton ended up with £350 million in contracts. Pestfix went through the high priority lane despite having a team of just 3 doing PPE. Due diligence was carried out retrospectively. The company told us there was a Dunkirk call to arms from ministers it had delivered on, and now it was being unfairly targeted. Ianda Capital, who work with Andrew Mills, a government advisor, received a £253 million contract for face masks. It describes itself as an investment firm. Run by Tim Horlick, it too was put into the high priority lane. The company says it can't be blamed for mistakes at Whitehall. Next week, the National Audit Office will deliver its second report on PPE spending, looking specifically at value for money. After first being caught out with too little stock, the government may now face the charge of overbuying at the height of the market, with too many middlemen taking a cut in between.
Well, our health and social care editor, Victoria McDonald, has been speaking to a whistleblower who describes what went on behind the scenes in the rush to acquire enough PPE when the rest of the world was scrambling to do exactly the same thing. And she joins us now live. Victoria.
Yes, I've been talking to an NHS employee who was brought over to work in procurement. Now, the interview is anonymous and he has been voiced by an actor because he is still working there. But he wanted us to know what was going on in those days when he describes it as the Wild West of procurement, when millions of pounds were being thrown at the problem that the fact was there was not enough PPE to protect health and social care staff against COVID-19. He also wanted to talk about VIP contracts. Now, these came in stamped VIP. They went to a separate section. But he said he had always hoped that they were going to companies that had a good and reliable relationship with the NHS. Instead, he said too often it turned out that these contracts were about who you know, not what you know.
I think you described it at one stage to me as like the Wild West. Mm-hmm. Why did you describe it like that?
Well, that's because it was such a frenzy at first to try and get any type of PPE. It was whatever you can get it. It doesn't matter really about the cost at all. If you can get X amount, just get it. I could look at budgets of up to £200 million to go out and buy a particular product from any supplier without really having much experience of spending that kind of budget. Obviously, yes, it would have to go up to the Cabinet Office after that, but we were looking at huge numbers that you just can't dream of. Having found some of the contracts that I did send emails to saying thanks but no thanks, they've still gone through and had contracts for supplying PPE to the NHS.
You had a script that said, I'm sorry, we're not going to follow through with this contract. And then suddenly you'd see they'd got the contract.
Yeah.
Well, how did you feel about that?
I felt like that was just totally wrong. We'd followed our script, our procedures, our due diligence, and then you're reading in the press that these people have actually got contracts. One team particularly dealt with VIP requests.
Were you ever told who this VIP was? Or do you know why they were given that flag, VIP?
No, we weren't told that at all. I would have hoped it was the case that these have been suppliers before. They've done a good job for the NHS and they are reliable and we should be using them. But when you did see certain names come up and you're thinking, well, this is not just because they're a good supplier. We've used them before. This is because they know a very important person.
So did you feel resentful about that? Did you feel it was immoral?
I felt it was a very immoral situation where we're all going to be going through austerity and NHS workers are not going to be getting their pay rises. And yet again, we can manage to all of a sudden find all this money to throw at these places.
There was an urgency, though, as I've said.
Oh, yes. As I say, there is an urgency, and we can all sort of say in hindsight, but it still felt that we were buying at ridiculous prices, and there were no reins on how much people were able to spend.
Well, we've had a response from the government tonight who told us that staff had worked tirelessly to source life-saving PPE for health and social care staff, adding price checks and controls were in place in order to protect taxpayers' money. And they said there had been a robust process of quality, credibility and due diligence checks. That meant only 0.5% of equipment bought and delivered failed to meet our very high clinical standards.
Victoria, thanks very much.
Well, when I spoke to the Business Minister, Nadeem Zahawi, earlier, I also asked him what he thought of that National Audit Office report and whether the best way to get a contract for PPE with the government is to know a Conservative MP or a minister.
No, I don't believe that is the case. Although what I say to you is we will look at the report very carefully and we will learn from it. The National Audit Office looked at a sample of about, I think, 20 contracts out of 8,000 contracts. They quite rightly also said that the government faced an unprecedented situation in March where only 1% of PPE was able to be sourced in the UK. Now it's, by the way, 70%, thanks to Lord Dayton and the PPE industrial strategy that we put in place. 70% can be sourced in the United Kingdom. The leader of the opposition himself said, we've got to unblock the blockages. His own shadow cabinet minister, Rachel Reeves, wrote suggesting that we buy PPE from a company that was set up with one director in it and no track record of doing anything in PPE, from an events management company that's never supplied any PPE, from a football agent and a football agent company, again, who have no track record. So the idea that this was all really easy is not true. We have to learn from this. All the protocols were followed. The contracts will be all published, so people can go on gov.uk and look at any contract in time when we can publish everything and people can see this. Of course, we'll learn the lessons from this, but I reject the idea that somehow the government acted in a way that was wrong. We wanted to get the 32 billion pieces of PPE in the front line, because what was important is to save lives and make sure that the front line people who are, to this day, having to deal with patients with COVID are protected.